New Year's Eve is usually filled with hope and excitement about new possibilities for the coming year. Some years I write resolutions and some years I don't. I'm grateful for what has been and am determined for what is to come. I always celebrate, sometimes alone and sometimes with friends. I like to take time to reflect and cherish my life. New Year's Eve in 2019, however, was different. In June 2019, I was by my dad's side, holding his hand as he took his last breaths. In October 2019, I sat with my father-in-law as he died only months after my own dad. And so at midnight, I farewelled a hard and emotional year with relief and some sadness, knowing that this new year was one that was going to be one without these two important family figures in my life. I knew as I stepped into 2020 that life was different and grief was ever present. In and around grief lived resilience, peace, and joy. I felt my dad with me and I knew I had to continue on. Now, New Year's Eve is often the time for crazy aspirational dreams, and one came to the surface: to write a book and dedicate it to my dad. Now, I'm a celebrant and I write meaningful, memorable, and magical ceremonies for weddings, baby namings, and funerals all the time. I had even written and delivered my own dad and my father-in-law's funeral services with immense pride and love. But to write a book, where would I begin? And what did I need to share? It seemed a daunting task, so I shelved the idea. And then when coronavirus took hold in Australia, my weddings were mostly postponing and grief returned as I had extra time on my hands to think and reflect and remember. After several consecutive days in bed, doing the doona dive was becoming boring. I wanted to emerge from this time having achieved something. So I thought a bit and the crazy idea came back. Now is the time to write your book. Tell your story. Dedicate it to Dad. So I wrote out some ideas and started writing it in a journal style. I woke up early each morning, about 4 a.m. And while the house was quiet, I played Debussy and I wrote. I often cried as I wrote and remembered and recounted stories I had forgotten. I told the story about how my dad died. I shared about my life, my loves, my losses, my triumphs, and my failures. I shared with authenticity and a raw honesty that was powerful and real. And as I wrote, I realized that I have been living a full life, a life I'm very grateful for. As I wrote about my dad, I knew he wasn't perfect, but in seeing his humanity, I gave him compassion. And I offered the same compassion to myself as well. A year ago, my brother popped in to visit Dad in Dubbo where he lived and was shocked at Dad's seemingly declining health, especially as he'd seen him only a month before. He rang me on his way home to Newcastle and said that I shouldn't leave it too long to visit Dad, as he was quite concerned. My dad was 94, and while I had no doubts that he was going to make it to 100, I agreed to visit with Charlie the following week. We tried to phone when we were just 10 minutes away, but Dad didn't answer the phone. It wasn't like him. We tried again. Still no answer. We arrived at his house and rang the doorbell. No response. We knew Dad kept the door unlocked for the ambulance service when he was awake, so we tried the door and it was unlocked. I opened the door and I called out in a loud but somewhat shaky voice, "Dad?" I heard Dad call out from his bedroom, and I opened the door, and he immediately said, "Don't come in, don't come in," and to send Charlie in. Dad had been stuck in the bathroom all night, unable to walk. I rang an ambulance, and they arrived fairly quickly and helped him get to their stretcher. Dad was insisting on not going to the hospital. We tried to convince Dad, but could see the fear in his eyes. Dad said, "If I go in, I might not come out." Charlie looked Dad in the eyes and made him a promise he couldn't keep. He promised to make sure he got back home. Dad agreed, and they whisked him off to the hospital. We spent many hours sitting with Dad as they did tests and tried physio. Dad kept looking to the future and getting us to help him investigate ways to renovate his bathroom to make mobility easier and things like that. There were so many medical problems though. Kidneys, heart, and then they found a slow-growing cancer that had been there undiagnosed for decades. Charlie and I realised that our dad was dying. We were heartbroken and still visiting every day. I had done a course a few months earlier to be a death doula, and the instructor had said that hope can be cruel. I did not understand that at the time. But when we realised and then knew that Dad was dying, the cruelest thing anyone could give was hope. It might sound strange, but hope takes away your chance to grapple with reality and to be present in that moment, rather than hanging on for a hoped-for fantasy. So we left nothing unsaid. I made Dad talk about love and life. I talked to Dad about how he wanted to be remembered, and I interviewed him about his life and prepared his funeral ceremony script. Dad was willing to have me do his funeral, and I was incredibly honoured but unsure how I was going to be able to do so. I chose songs for Dad's service and I played them for him. As I read the ceremony to Dad as he lay in his hospital bed, he listened intently, absorbing each word. When I was finished reading, silent tears streaming down my face, Dad shook my hand and told me it was excellent. He thanked me. The love and pride I had been seeking throughout my adult life was in that handshake. He didn't talk a lot more after that, and 24 hours later, he died with Charlie holding one hand and with me holding the other. In those final days, less than a month from when Dad first went to the hospital, we gave Dad a gift: acceptance, love, and appreciation. We thanked him for being our dad and acknowledged him for his life. I like to think that I helped to bring him to a peaceful place where he knew how he would be remembered and knew that he was and always would be loved. And so I wrote about my dad, and I wrote each morning. I wrote and wrote stories from my childhood, stories from work, stories from my love life, stories from my life. I laughed and cried and tried to be vulnerable because the person I imagined snuggling into their bed with my book deserved that. So I told things that I was really vulnerable about. 30 years ago, actually 30 years ago tomorrow, I had a complete hysterectomy at the age of 18, and my dreams of being a mum were destroyed. My notion of what it means to be a woman was also challenged, and I questioned whether I belonged. My dad felt that it was not something to be spoken of and that it was woman's business. And so I was not to talk to my brother about it or anyone outside of our immediate family. This decision added to my shame and pain. A week before I would have my operation, and despite Dad's instructions, I decided I needed to tell my brother. Charlie and I went for a walk to our local park, and I told him what was happening. He became quite upset and said, "So no one will ever want you? No one will love you?" "Oh, you'll never get married. Now, it wasn't that Charlie was being malicious or mean, just that Charlie had grown up in the same family dynamic that I had, with the same traditional gender roles and expectations. I'm sure I had thought it, but until that point, no one had said it out loud. I agreed that he was right. I probably wasn't going to get married. I probably was going to go through life alone. Any man who didn't want children wouldn't be the type of man I would want. And because he wouldn't share the same values. And I couldn't deprive the opportunity of a good man to be a father. So I agreed that my life was likely to be lived alone. Charlie was shaken by my news and he gave me an enormous hug. So 30 years ago tomorrow, I had the hysterectomy and was plunged into menopause. I continued to grapple with my life and my role as a woman, my identity. When my friends were all having babies, I was caring for and teaching the children of others as an early childhood teacher. I taught and cared, loved and shared, played and enriched the lives of the children I was so honored to work with. I remembered children I had been trusted with and the difference I had made in their lives by believing in them and caring for them with an open and generous heart. And as I wrote those chapters in the book, I honored my contribution in education and care. I loved teaching and my kids. What I didn't love, though, was the workplace politics and cultures of bullying that often occur in childcare centres. And in 1999, I was working as a director of a childcare centre when a mental health issue hit me hard. I left my workplace and my mum was by my side. She flew to Brisbane where I was living and supported me, loving me unconditionally, holding me as I cried and listening as I talked. They diagnosed me with severe depression and anxiety. And when I wrote about those years of torment, I cried as I recalled. I also recognized the love and support I had around me. When you're submerged in the dark, murky depths of depression, there seems to be such little hope. And yet, as I wrote about my pathway through, I recognized the deep strength and resilience I had. I saw my determination and my ability to make a difference to others. And I could see that in every career choice, I had done exactly that. I always looked to see how I could empower others and improve their lives. It was time for me to allow others to contribute to me as well. And that's when I met my wonderful partner, Dean. And after some time, I was privileged to be introduced to his two sons, aged 11 and 14 at the time. Over the last 10 years, I have loved and nurtured his sons as my own. I may have missed the cute sticky fingers years, and I may not have been there for most of their firsts. But I always say to Dean that the greatest gift he ever gave me was in allowing me to play a role in his children's lives. He always seems surprised by that because he thinks what I've given their family has been far greater, but he's wrong. Every all-nighter helping with assignments, every tear shed on my shoulder, every sick child tended, every conversation, every moment, happy, sad, angry, silly, all contribute to me knowing myself as a mum. Except I choose to love the boys. I may not be bound by blood, but I am bound by love, and that is far more important anyway. On Tuesday this week, I put on a one-woman show and book launch event, and at the end of the evening, Dean came up on stage and proposed. My stepsons were there, and I said yes. Yes to being his love for life, yes to a life of created joy and possibility, and yes to being their mum. And yet, being a mum was just a further expression of who I had been being all along, loving, caring, and nurturing. I realized that the qualities of being a mum did not require children, but it took becoming a devoted stepmom for me to realize that. And it took me writing my book for me to truly know just how special and valuable I am, and you are too. We all have our unique paths and our special contributions, and I hope that my stories, lessons, and learnings can empower the lives of women all over the globe now that we have released my book. $1, I'm so proud of this, $1 from every book sale goes to 5 different charities. The Cambodian Children's Trust, making a difference to communities and families in Cambodia. Prajwala, which is working to eradicate sex slavery in India. Rafiki Mwema, which is protecting children in Kenya who have been sexually assaulted as they wait to be part of the legal system. Transcend, which is providing advocacy and support for trans youth and their families in Australia. And the Jeannie Little Alzheimer's Research Fund, which is working on research to help eradicate Alzheimer's around the world. My book is called Beloved, Remembering, Discovering, and Creating Who You Are as You Journey Through Life. And this was the dedication I penned for my dad. To Arthur Charles Mccumstie, my dad, you faced it all and you stood tall and did it your way. Thanks for the love and inspiration. This book is about my way. I hope I've done him proud.